Welcome back to the Bazaar. I'm Inko, and the Bazaar has officially launched. With patch 1.0, there have been massive, great changes to monetization, and a new hero, Mak, has released. Mak looks very hype, but I'm not going to talk about either of those things today. The patch notes, the monetization, and Mak are all big enough topics to deserve their own video. It'd be like a 2-hour-long video if I tried to cram them all into one place. So if you want to hear monetization or Mak opinions, that'll be coming up in the next day or so. For now, we're going to get right into the patch notes. We're going to skip past Mak, we're going to skip past monetization. And the too long didn't read for me is that I'm very optimistic about both Mak as a hero and the new monetization system. It all looks very good to me. The first real set of changes is down here at end of combat and replay/recap. This is very minor. Previously, you were able to interact with your loot while you were in the recap phase, and sometimes that could matter. It was rare, but you have situations where your inventory was filled after the combat, and you were able to sell things, then go into the next day and fish something up so that your inventory wasn't full when it should have been. That's just no longer a thing. There are two new events, Mandala, which will transform your items, and at Tatiana, who will sell toys. I assume Tatiana is a pig vendor specifically. I don't know if anyone else has enough toys to see it. And I'll never have full opinions on stuff like this until we see it in game, because it's just impossible to really get a feel for how good this is. Like, what's the criteria on the transformation? Does it have any side effects? Does it have a cost? Etc, etc. We just need to play with it to discover how good it actually is. And while I've been recording this video, my girlfriend is currently playing the Bazaar. She found the new transform event and transformed her core on Dooley into these schematics. She has reloaded. It is permanent. It is not clear to me that that is an intentional thing you can do. I don't know if it's a bug or not, but it's very funny that you can. Now, during PvP, you'll see your opponent's equipped board. This is not really super important, but I kind of like it. It means I see different boards a lot more. It's just higher cosmetic diversity. I don't mind that at all. For the entire rest of the game, I'll still get to see whatever sick board I have equipped, and then I can judge my opponents harshly for their fashion sense. It would seem they've nerfed all of this stuff like enchanted gumballs and enchanted coconuts, with the on-sell enchantments being reduced in power. That's for the best. Realistically, if you're gonna have something like that, it should be giving +1 burn, you know, every single hour, not +2. We'll see if it's okay at half the power. It probably is, but it might still be overpowered. It's just a very dangerously powerful sort of effect to have. Freeze, haste, and slow have had their targeting rules simplified. The targeting was already pretty simplified. I'm going to assume they made fixed, because previously, if your opponent had 5 items and 3 were slowed and 2 weren't, and you did it in fact that said slow 3 items like Clamor or Dock Lines, it would just slow the 2 unslowed ones and fail to trigger the extra one. Or sometimes you would freeze all their active items and your items would freak out and start freezing passive items. So I don't think they mean they simplified the targeting rules. I think they mean they fixed the bugs in the targeting rules, which is very good. That's obviously a huge problem and can impact matches purely on the back of bugs making some builds much weaker. They fixed some bugs where if you had a regeneration skill that gave you flat regen, whenever you sold something that gave you regen, it would just give you the skill again, which was crazy broken. If you ever hit someone with like 1,000 plus regen on the ladder, it was probably this bug that they just fixed. And now lifesteal counts as healing. That's honestly incredibly minor, but there are some effects where it could be a big deal. Frankly, this is mostly a game integrity change. It just makes things more intuitive. It's not really much for balance. Moving on to encounter updates, B1 and B2 can now show up all the way to day 8, which is really nice. Previously, you might find yourself with a bronze item at the end of day 6, but in the awkward spot of needing to sell it so you can get a better one, or being forced to use an upgrade really inefficiently on it. Having B1, B2 show up a little bit longer than bronze items makes a lot of sense, and just the same, it makes sense that they can't show up on the literal first hour of the game when you haven't found items yet, so that's all good. They finally fixed BazaarCon to show up in the same order every time. Just thank you, it's been a hassle, no one liked it. The hospital and medicine cabinet events, I believe those are the ones where you get just a healing item, can now also drop regen items, which makes sense. That's how the vendor for that worked as well. Vanessa had a plunder for treasure option unique to her at the jungle ruins, where she got a small silver item. Previously, it could give loot items, which felt pretty terrible. Now it no longer does. Lost Crate previously gave a silver tier upgrade hammer. Now it gives a random medium item. They haven't just removed duping from the game, but what they have done is vastly reduce the availability of doing it. I would say probably well over 90% of item dupes you would see on the ladder came specifically from Lost Crate giving you an upgrade hammer and a player intending from the moment the game started to duplicate an item with that hammer. So this is going to really help to level out some of the crazy outliers like duped pearls, drills, and matchboxes that really dominated the ladder during open beta. Great change. And there's been an upgrade to Strange Mushrooms Traded option, which I'm not sure what that one was because it wasn't get 4 gold. So maybe it's better now, maybe it's more worth clicking, but I'm probably still going to Strange Mushroom for 4 gold. Coming down to monster updates, the Blood Reef Captain now puts his wheel next to literally any active items. I'm hoping that it's between the two burn items, because if it's next to the ship, he is literally harder than almost every other enemy on that day, despite being in the weakest enemy slot. Joyful Jack got his items reworked. He desperately needed that. I don't know if you noticed in the last patch, but since the rework of some of the items he was using, he dealt literally no damage or poison or anything. He just healed himself kind of a small amount. He was an awful fight. So he dropped one of his succulents for a floor spike, and also one of his succulents went bad. I think that means they both became different items. Who knows? But yeah, Joyful Jack needed different items. I'm glad to see him moving in that direction. Brawl Street Champion now is a gold tier nitrogen hammer. He's a little bit scary if you fought him on day 10, so I can understand that. Lich actually got a nerf, just a straight up nerf. Not like they reworked an item to be more powerful, they just made his items worse. I mean, don't click Lich, he's still going to kill you effortlessly, but at least he's a little bit worse now. And the Mimic, which you can only find in like very late day monster encounter events. Now it has the Ravenous trait, which is the first time you fall below half health each fight, destroy an item for the fight. That's a very, very good skill. This isn't really so much important because it's on the Mimic, as because now you'll find people who have this from Zerfin. And this is probably one of the generically best skills in the game now. Obviously a lot worse against burn and poison than other types of builds, but this can just brick your opponent. It goes off every fight, it has no downside. It is absolutely terrifying. I'm not going to enjoy losing to it, which I'm sure I'll do quite a lot more often than anyone expects to do. Now, coming down to item changes, we're starting off with Pygmalion. Atlas Stone got unbonked back to 6 seconds. It was basically unplayable, and one of the big things I said is in the next patch, I want to see things that are bad get unbonked or buffed in some way, so I'm happy to see it. In the same vein, Beehive and Bees all had their damage scaling doubled. Great. Caltrops lost the toy tag. This makes sense. The toy vendor was a lot better if it just targets Caltrops specifically on Pig. But additionally, they kind of aren't toys. Like, yeah, you can get toy Caltrops, but they certainly were not the toy kind. For the close sign, the regen value has been cut to 50/100% from 100/200%, and that's just not really important to me, right? The best health scaling builds are not using close sign. They're just killing you, right? They're doing something silly, and close sign's not really an important part of it. Like, compare close sign to any offensive enchant on the luxury huts, right? There's just... It's fine. It's a very strong item when it's going off, but I don't know that close sign needed this. I already didn't want to play close sign, and if I was going to play it, this is still going to be thousands of regen. It's not like it doesn't work anymore, so I don't know. It feels like a nothing change to me. Crystal Bonsai getting unbonked is weird and unimportant to me. It's not like anyone's using it for PvP fights. It's not like its actual effect on the board matters, but I mean, yeah, it was awful on the board, so buffing it makes sense. Golf clubs had their damage scaling literally doubled, and thank God for that. That implies a Kukri buff is coming and getting ahead. It got unbonked. Its damage scaling was also literally doubled. Wait, no. Not quite doubled, unfortunately, but increased dramatically, and its base damage was doubled. Kukri and golf clubs have both been very bad for a very long time, and maybe they'll be a little bit playable now. Hot Stones had its regen values changed. I was going to say nerfed. They're 2 lower at bronze and 1 higher at regen, so it scales much more effectively with tier now. This isn't really normalization, because normally when that happens, gold is either the same or a little bit worse, and diamond is much worse, but diamond's better here. This is really just like a change, because bronze hot stones would single-handedly win early fights, I guess. But I'm not sure that was really a problem, like so does every poison item. Bit confused on this one too. Moving on down, we have Ice Cream Truck gaining the food type. Makes sense, it's what the truck delivers. And now it freezes multiple items for 1 second as opposed to 1 item for multiple seconds as it scales up, and gains the Deadly Enchant. What does that do? No idea. How Bazaar is updated already though, so I can check. Your non-weapon items have plus 30% crit chance. Not what I'd expect, decent enchant. Not upset with that at all. Although realistically, if you're playing Ice Cream Truck, I don't know, there's probably a Steam ladle on your board that would appreciate this enchant. It seems like it's sort of a random effect for a truck, but at the same time, I don't really know what Ice Cream Truck builds want in the first place. I never play them and I never see them. The Igloo received the same exact change where now it freezes multiple items as opposed to 1 item for longer, and when you freeze, the shield gained has been reduced in scaling by 25 at gold and 100 at diamond. I'm not sure anyone was out here saying that Diamond Igloo was really steamrolling the end game for Pig. That wasn't the late game Pig thing that needed a nerf. I will say that like if you're adding more items and more effects that do this multi-freeze thing, then maybe this does get too strong. I'll trust that there are internal metrics that justify this. But seeing a fairly massive nerf to Igloo, because don't make a mistake, this is a nerf. It seems like it's technically an equal change. It's not, it's matchup dependent. If you fight any one weapon build, as opposed to really effectively locking them out, you freeze one item for 1 second instead of one item for 3 seconds, right? It is not clearly transparently better to freeze more items for less time. It is, in fact, usually worse. Not usually, on average. Oh my god, Drum was almost a good item previously, and they multiplied its scaling by 5. The Jabalian Drum meta is coming. It is coming for your ladder points. They might have removed the Matchbox dupe, but there is a new mid-game pig in town, and I, for one, am terrified of this. We covered Kukri already. I got my Landscraper run in just in time. It looks like it's been redesigned for this patch. It desperately needed it. It was not a good card. The redesign for Landscraper puts it at a 7-second cooldown, 200 base shield value. Your shield items have plus shield equal to this item's value, which will include itself, because it's not your other shield items. And when you sell 10 items, give this plus... It's got ledger stapled onto it. It's just always being affected by a ledger, effectively, of the same tier as it. Is Vineyard the same? Sort of, with 1 second faster cooldown, otherwise identical. What do I think of this rework? The best properties are stupidly fast. Fixer Upper and Subscraper can easily go off in under 2 seconds to get start of combat haste. Pawn Shop starts off, in effect, it is a passive item. So 7 and 6 seconds are still pretty long. But these don't feel like property scalers, do they? Like, you do scale them the same sort of way, but Landscraper is for playing a shield build, and Vineyard's for playing a heal build. They're meant to buff wide boards now. And they can also be used in conjunction with those other scalers very effectively, right? They're just going to add a massive buff to the Fixer Upper or the Subscraper. And maybe on like day 15, it's a minuscule amount that's not really a big part of your sum total, but it could be a meaningful amount to help you turn the corner on like days 5 through 9, I think. I think this is a good place for a card to inhabit. I'm not sure if it's strong. I don't think it's weak, and I do think it's interesting. Next up, Ledger took a nerf, and it got the exact nerf I wanted to see. It just gives 1 less value at each tier. This is really important because previously, even at silver tier, you were essentially just selling and buying a 2 gold item and flipping it for 1 gold. Cost you nothing because that was break even with what Ledger generated. So even at silver tier, it was a very, very good economy item outside of property scaling, which is clearly where it was best, right? So by reducing it to the point where it is costing you money at silver tier, as well as just lowering its output in general by 20%, I think that's a meaningful nerf. And it's such a core part of property builds, where if you nerf it more than this, maybe it's just not even good anymore. Like if you drop it to 3, is that worth caring about? And then on top of that, you can't nerf its tier. You can't just like keep these two the same and stop it spawning at silver because you need to find this early in the game. I think this is the right nerf for Ledger, and I'm interested in seeing how it plays. It's obviously still really strong, but some cards are meant to be really strong, and I think their new design for Ledger is one of those cards. Oh my god, Lumbors is playable? No shot. 7-second cooldown, a 2-second buff is not nothing, it's still kinda slow. Damage 10, so it's flat now, but its damage scaling is so much better. 150% more across the board. So yeah, sure, it hits for 5 less at bronze, you know, until it scales itself on the first swing, at which point it's already massively better. Even the very first swing of... No, it doesn't hit for less at bronze, it's actually buffed at bronze. That's not even true. Yeah, Lumbors are just a playable item now. I'm looking forward to this. The Weapon Pig seems a lot better. I'm personally kind of sad about it because I will not be playing Weapon Pig. I have Mac to play. I'm going to be grinding Mac like a lunatic until I get my over-explained video out, but Weapon Pig looks very, very real. Matchbox taking a nerf. I kind of wish they hadn't. I understand if you think Matchbox is too strong, and Matchbox builds in the mid-game, the really high roll ones will probably still be dominating, but you'll see later in these patch notes that burn skills also got hit a little bit, and I think with the nerf of burn skills and the removal of duping, Matchbox could have afforded to stay at 4 seconds for this patch, and then they could change it next patch if it continued being powerful. I'm sure internally they tested it, but like, I just don't like seeing multiple nerfs at a card in the same patch. They removed duping, the burn skills all got nerfed, Matchbox also took a nerf, it's gotten triple nerfed. If it went from king of the meta to literally unplayable with that amount of hits, I wouldn't be surprised. I suspect it's okay, but not great. Certainly not the ideal mid-game compared to the new weapon stuff we're seeing, at least it feels that way. Monocle getting unbunked, that's fine, it was too slow. Still a bad item, but I mean, buff things that are bad until they get good, right? I'm fine with that. That's a good change. The open sign got the same change as the close sign. Instead of being 100, 200, now it's 50, 100. I'm gonna be real with you. I am not sure I've ever seen open sign on a board, and looking at it, not really sure why. I think the answer is that in basically any build where open sign is good, you probably already one-shot them and didn't need the buff damage from this. But yeah, open sign was kind of crazy, even if no one ever played it. That's my assessment of the card. So maybe it needed a nerf, maybe it didn't. I don't know, maybe there's something I'm not seeing with the open sign nerf where it was warranted. I can't recall the last time I picked one up or used one on the ladder. Looks like Pepper Spray had been sneaking through on the damage normalization stuff, so they finally got around to it. Better at bronze, worse at diamond, normal stuff here. There's a new pitchfork item. It's basically shovel, but instead of digging up a random bronze item, it digs up a truffle. If you have a property, 2 truffles. It's obviously very good. They normalized the base damage on Spiky Shield, and you know what? It needed to be normalized. Does it affect the game even a fraction of a percent? No. This change will never affect any combat anyone ever participates in. But it is an important change. It did need to be normalized. So I am still glad to see them catching the items that have been slipping through on damage normalization, even if this one is particularly unimportant. And Yo-Yo is back to 4 seconds. That became one of the items I wanted unbonked the most. Yo-Yo at 5 seconds just doesn't charge when an adjacent item goes off. It takes 2 still. So essentially in many builds, there was no difference in having a diamond yo-yo or a gold yo-yo. And this makes diamond yo-yo actually a very scary thing again, especially in conjunction with new stuff like the new Jabalian drum that can be buffing at 15 damage every time you use the yo-yo, which you will be doing quite frequently. So Pig is in general looking, I would say, stronger. The Matchbox nerf hurts, and the Ledger nerf hurts a little bit, not a ton I would think. But in general, mostly just some minor item buffs to things that weren't being used very much, and then very notable buffs on Jabalian Drum, on Lumbors, and on the Yo-Yo. I think Weapon Pig in the mid game is looking a lot better, maybe good enough to go the distance and win on like day 13 and 14. Next up, for the Vanessa changes, Cannonade now starts at silver at 100 damage, and as you scale it up, it'll get up to 300 damage, 50% more than the previous diamond Cannonade. I think this is a really good change. Cannonade's like a build-around item that you have to transition into after day 5, which is a really weird place for an item to live, so having Cannonade be available earlier is a really important change for that archetype. Additionally, just didn't hit that hard. It needed more damage, it got more damage, happy to see it. This is a good buff, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more Cannonade builds. Now, moving on to Catfish, it turns out the reason Vanessa set looked bad is because they're actually pushing the Vanessa set by buffing all the old items that wanted to be in the Vanessa set. We added, when you use a friend, haste that friend. We added, give a friend multicast. And we added something that's going to multicast haste your whole board. And there are some cards that really benefit from that, namely Catfish and Shark Ray, and they got buffed so much. I want to say that I personally already thought Catfish was just as good as Pufferfish for being the core of a poison build that could carry you to 10 wins. They literally tripled the poison scaling on this guy, up from 4 per haste at diamond to 12 per haste at diamond. This is just gonna kill people. There are so many new synergy pieces for it, and it is so strong. I don't know, I'd expect to see a buff like this for Jit, which Jit did get buffed. It got doubled, so like, fair enough, they did buff Jit like this. But Catfish was notably more playable, it's getting notably more synergy, and it got tripled. So I don't, dude, Catfish is gonna be a menace. You're gonna see a lot of Vanessas just destroy people with Catfish. Diving Helmet got a much needed redesign. Now it's essentially a 2-size shield seaweed. It gained the line when you use an aquatic item that gains plus 5, 10, 15 shield for the fight, in addition to making the adjacent items aquatic. So suddenly this is a very real usable item, and I'm looking forward to seeing some new Diving Helmet builds, although a little bit worried about how strong Vanessa's defenses might be getting with something like this. Next up, Electric Eels got a buff. They're down to 6-second cooldown, and they have twice the base damage. Electric Eels were already pretty good. It required a decent bit to make them work, but not that much more than any other one weapon. I think this buff actually pushes them into just being like a pretty viable meta weapon. Previously, it required a little bit of work to make sure that your Electric Eels at diamond would go off every 2 times an enemy used an item and essentially be caltrops. It requires a lot less work with a 1 second shorter cooldown. How much less work? Literally all of it. It just works now. It's just caltrops every other item at Diamond with no additional input, and that's a really massive change. Additionally, it's also just stronger at every tier with the shorter cooldown. Fishing rod's also receiving a rework. It's basically just massively better if you put it on your board. The cooldown's been dropped from 9 seconds to 5, and now it's always a 2-second haste as opposed to scaling with tier. Essentially, the only thing fishing rod scales with tier is what it gives you, and the effect on your board is a medium 5-second use item that hastes the item to the right for 2 seconds. That's playable. That's not great, but it's way more playable than the same effect at 9 seconds. And let's be honest, after you had silver and gold items, were you ever putting your fishing rod on the board? No, of course not. So the only tier where the value of fishing rod on your board even matters is bronze in the first place. Additionally, most of the things in Vanessa that cared about haste care about how often you apply the haste. So even though theoretically the 5 seconds every 9 is more haste per second than the current Diamond version, it didn't actually matter for things like catfish and pufferfish. They would still prefer the new version. As mentioned, Jeet's just been straight up doubled. Base damage, doubled. Scaling, doubled. Quality, still in the dumpster. Probably not a good item anyway. Katana's back to 2 seconds, you love to see it. It's also took a very slight damage hit, doesn't matter at all. If Katana's on your board, you have a ton of things adding damage to it. The base damage could be 1 in all tiers, it'd be just as good. Make Study the Blade memes funnier. But hey, whatever. I'll gladly take a 1 damage per tier nerf in exchange for being as fast as it should be. Next up, an item I've never seen on a board, never considered really putting on a board myself, Lockbox. It has had its value scaling tripled. Now it's just a usable economy item in the first place, because previously it was like the one economy item in the game that I would literally never take, because I'd have to hold it for so many fights that it wouldn't pay for itself anyway. Now, on top of that, it might actually be giving enough damage to go onto a board in the first place. So I'm looking forward to the new Lockbox. Narwhal got unbonked and it got a massive damage increase. Actually just a playable weapon now. It went from like dumpster tier, basically a piranha, to, you know, real card. Not an incredible card, but it's not that far behind Fang in its current state. Next up, the Primordial Depth Charge has been renamed to Elemental Depth Charge. Just good, that's what it is. It's for waking up the Primordial, but that's not like the appropriate name for it. The Deadly Enchant on Ramrod has been doubled in value to 50%, fine by me. Repeater got a massive increase to its damage as you increase the tier. Previously, it only gained speed, it did not actually deal more damage, and this contributed to Repeater builds sometimes really falling off in the late game and failing to close out their runs. I think this is a good change, I'm happy to see it. And it looks like they increased the damage on Rifle at every tier. That makes sense, because compared to a Katana, like why would you ever run a Rifle now, when Katana is directly so much better if it's so much faster? So I think the base damage change is probably necessary there. Minor bug fix on Sextant. Shark Claws are now a little bit higher base damage. No, not true. It's actually worse at bronze for some reason. On average, higher base damage. And the scaling damage, oh my fuck, the scaling damage. What are those numbers? Lumbors, get out. Why was I hyped about Lumbors? Do you see those scaling damage numbers? Dude, you're gonna get murdered by Shark Claws, man. Shark Claws have been a meme item for so long. It's like, oh, look at the new player. He doesn't realize the scaling damage on Shark Claws don't matter, because other items just start off with more damage than Shark Claws will ever generate. Like, yeah, there was the occasional build where Shark Claws were the right choice, but by and large, Shark Claws were always a detriment to your build. Those are ridiculous numbers, right? That is a lot of damage scaling. Non-ammo weapon Vanessa is looking a little bit more real, with items like Shark Claws and the new Cannonade in the mix. I'm terrified of this. Shark Ray's base damage increased slightly, its scaling increased really substantially by 10 at gold and 20 at diamond, roughly the same at silver, potentially much better at high tiers now, especially in conjunction with the new set for Vanessa. And Silencer has lost the tech type. I think this is mostly a change to the schematic so that Dooley will stop generating silencers, because they were probably seeing a bunch of Dooleys using the new 3D printer card to get 4 silencers in their board, which was probably a little bit broken. So, you know, good change there to balance around 3D printer, but not really an important change for anything else. Torpedo's getting a small buff, unbonked to 8 seconds, and better damage scaling. Definitely more playable, but I think you probably only run this if you're like missing Cannonade or Shark Claws. I think it's sort of an inferior piece for the board that you're not really planning on running. Next up, tropical item enchants now scale based on its region. I believe they were previously flat values. That's not really the important part about enchanting a tropical item. It's more about the burning coconuts, which, as we've mentioned, have been nerfed, thank God. Hopefully it's going to be reasonable now. And Vanessa's amulet has some new enchants. Now it can take shiny, which is the same as deadly basically. And the effect of obsidian is very slightly different in that now it can't crit, basically because it's passive as opposed to adding to your active items that are critting. And if this is the full change to the Wanted poster, they basically just gutted the main reason to update it because now it no longer gives additional experience. And popping over to howbazaar.gg, it looks like it only ever gives 1-in-1. They decided that high roll bullshit I did in my Vanessa over-explained was not acceptable. Fair enough. Which brings us to Dooley items, and the Alpha Ray is getting a much needed buff. Its cooldown's dropping back to 6 seconds. It was pretty bad previously. Now it deals slightly more base damage, and more importantly, as it goes up in tier, its damage scales a little bit more. Now, unfortunately, this is probably still just trash. I hate to say it. I'm all for incremental buffs. Like, I would have much rather we took that catfish buff step by step instead of just straight tripling it right away, for instance. But this was unplayable. It was a card that dealt no damage on its own that scaled your damage by pitiful amounts. It's still basically that. I can't really imagine Alpha Ray making a case for being on pretty much any board other than like the first couple of days when you really haven't gotten your feet under you yet and you're sort of playing whatever the game gives you. It's just very low damage scaling. You can do better. Beta Ray no longer has a small item restriction. It can freeze anything, and that is a massive buff to Beta Ray. Holy shit. Charcoal got unboxed. He needed it. He has 1 higher base burn. Not going to pretend that matters. And 1 higher burn scaling. That matters a lot. On the whole, I don't think Charcoal is going to be like the good way to burn with Dooley. It feels grossly outclassed by stuff like Microdave, Soldering Gun, obviously any sort of burn condition being applied to a drill. Thermal Lance, that's the big one I was forgetting. This feels like it's coming in at best 5th place for burn options on Dooley. And most things that want you to use friends want you to use a lot of guides, and this guy's still pretty slow. So I'm not convinced Charcoal is good, but I'm happy to see it getting incremental buffs. Hopefully they keep coming and someday Charcoal is good. Now they buffed Claw Alarm. It starts at silver now, its damage is down to 20. It used to be 40 at all tiers, I assume, and its damage scaling is now 20, 40, 60. What did it used to be? And because I very genuinely don't even know what Claw Alarm does because it never got played, I have to come over and look at it. Oh, it looks like howbazaar.gg is in a weird limbo state, or that patch note is wrong. Because this is the correct flat damage. It doesn't say 40, but it allegedly only has gold and diamond tiers right now, no silver tier. Anyway, the important part of this is when this gains haste, this and the weapon to the left of this gain damage. So is that good? Dude, you need a lot of haste, and I don't know. I don't think so. It's a really weird, awkward effect for an item to have. I don't think this is very effective. It looks like it's playable, but not exceptional in any way. Florence is seeing its damage scaling go up by a not insubstantial amount. Over doubled at diamond tier, doubled at gold tier, and a little bit better at silver. That's a pretty substantial buff. Maybe he's playable now. Combat Core scaling has been increased by 50% across the board. It needed it. It was so little for how slow it was, and old Combat Core was really disappointing. Maybe a 50% buff on scaling is all it needs. That might make it good again. Anyway, back on track, Coolant is getting down to 5 seconds, unboxed as it needed to be. It no longer is targeting only small items, so that is a massive buff to Coolant, just like Beta Ray. Dooley's freeze abilities are getting a lot stronger here. What's not getting stronger is DJ Robot. They crippled the nanobots from him. You only get 1 per purchase now. Would have liked to see it go down to 2 at least at first. Again, I don't like seeing huge sweeping changes all at once unless a card is genuinely completely broken or completely underpowered. I don't think DJ Robot was just like, oh, you get Robot and you win runs. I have seen a lot of people with DJ Robot lose to my builds. Maybe it's the sort of thing where like the skill floor is so low that the averages are really bad. There are a lot of people who like feel as though DJ Robot is so strong compared to their skill level. I don't know. This feels like a bridge too far. It's probably still playable. DJ Robot on his own is good. Like, you don't need the nanobots. You can play around the haste that he gives. But I feel like only getting 1 tiny little guy just thematically isn't the same. I would like to see 2 tiny little guys. At the very least, he's not overpowered anymore. That definitely got fixed. Oh, Duct Tape taking a very meaningful nerf, and also a type of board positioning we haven't really seen before. Cooldown 6, it got unboxed, that's fine. The cooldown hardly matters. But the passive part, is now when you use the item on the left instead of adjacent items. So now you're getting half the duct tape, but it opens up some positioning things that would previously get very awkward for optimizing duct tape. And I think I actually prefer this item design, especially in light of Defense Grid, which we're about to talk about. Sorry, Defensive Matrix, formerly known as Fuel Rod. Starts at silver tier, haste adjacent items 1, 2, or 3 seconds. You don't need to know how long it takes, shut up, it's a passive item. The important part of it is when you use an adjacent item, it's old duct tape at medium size. And for nerds like me who care about mechanics, it has an 8-second use time for that haste, and that's pretty important because haste is mechanically very powerful. The difference in like 11 and 5 is massive, so 8 seconds seems like a reasonable duration for that effect to me. Especially when you consider that the main purpose of this item is the last line, it's duct tape. And I'm very happy with both Fuel Rod and the Dualtron because these are both things that are buffing in very meaningful ways the Armored Core, which felt like the worst core by far previously. Speaking of buffs, Hamlet is getting buffed. Sure, the cooldown is even slower now, but if you weren't slowing, you shouldn't be running Hamlet anyway. Now, when you slow, charge this 2 seconds instead of 1. That doesn't take a whole lot of slow before Hamlet becomes incredibly fast, actually looks somewhat playable again. It's been a while since we saw that. Now, I'm not sure Armadillo needed it, because I don't think Armadillo was the weak part of Shield Dooley, but I don't think Armadillo was anywhere near overpowered, and it's getting a pretty big buff. Its damage is scaling tremendously higher now. It's now 50 per tier, up from 25 per tier. So 25 more at silver, 50 more at gold, and 75 more at diamond. The upgrades are way more worth it. This card is much more mechanically powerful than it used to be, especially in the early and mid game. Ice 9000 is back. It's a 9-second cooldown, Poison 9, freeze 1 item for 1, 2, or 3 seconds depending on tier. I guess it starts at silver. And when you use a friend, give this plus 3, 6, or 9 poison for the fights. The Gamma Ray is now Poison 4, 6, 8, up from 2, 3, 4, and Poison scaling is 2, 3, 4, up from 1, 2, 3, and is now a mirror of Omega Ray. I'm guessing that was the exact stats Omega Ray had then. Kinetic Cannon now has damage scaling of 25, 50, 75, up from 20, 30, 40. There is a monster that uses this that might be a lot scarier now. Worth keeping that in mind when we're playing. However, as for us, Kinetic Cannon previously really wasn't playable at all. 5 more damage at silver isn't changing that. And when we're talking about diamond items, we're talking about late game. I don't think even 35 more scaling is enough to save it. I think Kinetic Cannon definitely needs the buff. I'm happy to see it. But this makes it go from unplayable trash to trash. Like now it is playable trash. That's what the buff accomplishes. Lens now charges another tech item 1, 2 seconds. Previously it gave the core very minor damage. So this is just a speed up your board sort of item. I think that's a good home for it. It's definitely a lot less specific and niche than it used to be. Next up, there's been a redesign for Motherboard. Cooldown 5, haste adjacent items for 1, 2, or 3 seconds depending on tier, and when you use an adjacent tech item, charge this 1 second. Again, just another item designed to make techs really fast. I can see this going between Lens and something else on a railgun board and being very effective. I think that's a much more interesting home for that archetype. Nitrogen Hammer is also taking a redesign. Now it's cooldown 10, deal 200, freeze an item for 1 or 2 seconds depending on tier. When you freeze, charge this 1 second, and it gains 100 or 200 damage for the fight. Dooley's got like a couple of freeze items now, including Blue Beetle. You might be able to make a Nitrogen Hammer build with this. I don't know what the old version did. I think it didn't freeze, so it didn't scale itself. But also, just like all of the bonked freezes that Dooley had weren't that great. Also, does the Frost Street Champion just kill me now? That looks really scary with an iceberg, man. Okay, there's been a P-Air Conditioner redesign. It's not labeled as such, but it definitely is. It starts at gold tier again. Its cooldown's 8, up from 6. But now instead of freezing 1 item for 1 second at diamond, it scales up to freeze 2 items for 1 second. And it's charged not just by the core, but by friend use. P-Air Conditioner is definitely playable again. That looks very strong, especially at diamond. Railgun is receiving damage scaling buffs. It's the same at silver, but it's 50 more at gold and 100 more at diamond. I think that's very good. I think it needed those changes. It fell off really, really hard in the late game previously. And there's been a flat 1 second reduction in the duration of a remote control. That's fine by me. Seems like it needed it. Uzi's also got a minor redesign. Previously, Uzi was played in pretty much every board just to make your core faster. Now it's better at dealing damage. A bronze tier Uzi would previously have dealt 24 damage, and now it deals 60 damage before it runs out of ammo. But because it's scaling its ammo with tier now, it's way worse at making your core faster at lower tiers because it runs out at 12 seconds at bronze. It's actually meant to be part of weapons now. It's not just doing good in any build because it is fast, which I think is a good change. Previously, the fact that Uzi was used in like every early game Dooley just because it was quick seems like a kind of thematic failing on the card. Weak point detector got unbonked and its scaling got buffed. Scout Trooper's going to kill me this patch, more than once. It's going to take me a while to internalize how much scarier he is now. You probably don't go there unless you high roll like a crazy person, or unless you have a really good defense scaling build. Scout Trooper is so much scarier. This is a not insubstantial amount of buff. I think he had a silver one, right? Yeah, Scout Troopers is silver. So he's getting 4 more damage per use, and he's using it 1/7 more often. Scout Trooper's a bit scary now. Welding Torch got a not insubstantial buff. It now has scaling cooldown, starting at 7 seconds at bronze, down to 4 seconds at diamond, and flat burn instead. Also, 8 burn every 7 seconds is a lot more damage than 4 burn every 6. And it's not even close. Like, if you are not proliferating burn, you have 1 burn item, this Welding Torch is a lot better. Coming out to 36 damage every 7, as opposed to 10 damage every 6. It's just a massive improvement if you're just using this to hit them with the burn and that's it. And I'm not going to cover these Mac item changes now, because I'm going to cover all the Mac item stuff in another video. Suffice it to say, some of the more egregious outliers like early game Bottled Lightning, late game Pendulum all got changes, but we're going to move on to other items and cover the Mac changes in their own video once howbazaar.gg updates, and I can talk about all the Mac items in order. Getting into the other items, Cinders, Extract, and Sharpening Stone are all now bronze tier loot items. I'm really glad they changed this back. There's been like a very massive divide between how good loot items are at bronze and silver. They were not remotely equal. Now it's really just the Vial of Blood that comes in at silver, I think, and the Upgrade Hammer. So it's much more valuable proportionally to get bronze loot items than it used to be, and I like that. They also fixed a bug where Dragonheart charged twice off of burn items. I did not notice this during my runs, but the item's still completely broken. It's just a little bit less comically broken than it was, apparently. And lastly, they buffed the flat damage on Sunder pretty substantially at lower tiers. They also fixed a lot of deadly enchants. I don't know what that's referring to, but I'm glad they fixed it, whatever it was. Moving on to our last section, the skill changes. First Strike is now 50 or 75% crit chance, up from 30 or 50. And it's the inverse of Crescendo, where you start with a lot of crit and you lose it every time you use an item. And just like Crescendo, it is in a really weird spot balance-wise, where it's probably either completely broken with your build or useless with your build. And unlike Crescendo, well, like new Crescendo, unlike old Crescendo, First Strike has never been good because this is not enough to guarantee you crit with your first hit on something like a double whammy or a force field build where you would really want that kind of effect. And if you're not critting with it guaranteed, then why are you picking it over something else? That's basically the argument, right? With this much crit chance, it might be good enough to see play in some builds now, not many. Just like building Crescendo, I think First Strike will always be in a really precarious spot balance-wise, where it's simultaneously very close to useless and very close to broken at basically any number. Hopefully this will be like the sweet spot for it, where some builds use it, most don't, and it's not overpowered. But I have little faith that First Strike or building Crescendo will ever be in balance spots. I hope I'm wrong. Next up, we have a huge package of skills. Improved Toxins and its burn equivalent Fiery, Initial Dose, Final Dose, and their burn equivalents Final Flame and Immolating Spark. All of the poison and burn mainstay skills that start at bronze are worse now. The value for Improved Toxins has been cut by half. The value for Fiery has been cut by half. The leftmost, rightmost skills have all been dropped to multiples of 2 instead of multiple 3, so cut by 33%. This is a good change. I personally don't like it. I love these skills. I love playing with them. They're very good. But at the same time, if you got one of these skills as your gold starting skill, you basically won the run off of it. And if you got any of these skills, like the gap between playing a burn build with 2 of these at bronze and a none was insurmountable. So these in general represented too much power in the builds that used them. There was nothing as strong for weapon builds as these skills were for damage over time skills, or damage over time builds rather. So I think they needed the nerf. These nerfs are like just about as light a touch as you can put on them without fundamentally changing them, right? They can't reduce the numbers by less than the amount they did, and I think it needed to happen. It's going to hurt for a while, it feels gutting, but I think this is a really good change and opens up the game a lot. And next up, we have 2 completely new skills that look very good starting at silver, Searing Flames and Streamline Weapon. I wonder if there's another one they forgot about for poison, or if that one's just not implemented yet. But when one of your burn items gains haste, if it already has haste, It gains 1, 2, or 3 burn for the fight. Streamlined Weapon is the same effect for weapons, giving 5, 10, or 15 damage for the fight. And I think that this is like by far at its best in either a water wheel build for poison, that might be why poison didn't get implemented, or something like a solar farm build for burn. Or a pyrocarbon build for burn as well. Like Dooley burn builds will make some really gross use out of Searing Flames, I imagine. And I think these two new skills are both like interesting, good designs that incentivize you to overhaste your board in a way that like we haven't seen before. The best skills are skills like these where they change how you build your character, right? If you get Final Dose, you just put the important poison item on the right side of your board. You don't really change your build. I find Searing Flames and Streamlined Weapon to be good and worth engaging with, but also to fundamentally change how you design your board, and I think that's a really good thing for a skill to do. Now, getting back to the top of this, getting the recap, what do I think has changed? Dude, I can't even imagine where to start. Mac's in the game, right? Like, 1, Mac is in the game. 2, there are 2 new card sets really heavily revamping Vanessa and Dooley. 3, everyone is playing with all of the old stuff where they're forced to play with a new Vanessa set, meaning Weapon Vanessa is generally weaker. And then everyone is playing with the old Pig stuff, which probably just means Pig is better. I don't believe that shit's pay to lose at all. Then you have stuff like Weapon Pig getting a very meaningful buff. You have stuff like, what was it in Vanessa? Catfish, just anything that scaled off Catfish being massively more powerful. Lots of small items being pushed closer to viability with minor changes. Weapon Vanessa getting a pretty big thing with Cannonade and like Electric Eels, but honestly so minor compared to a lot of other buffs that it's hard to say. Huge amounts of items getting unbunked. I don't know. I don't have a summary for this one, man. The game has been severely overhauled in a way where I cannot predict what's good. I expect to see a very diverse meta and a lot of really powerful gross things, and I'm probably not going to see anywhere near as much of as I should for the first couple of days because I imagine the ladder is like 90% Mac builds right now. That's not true. There are free-to-play players not playing Mac, I imagine. New players not playing Mac. So it won't quite be the 90% I expect, but yeah, there's a lot of changes that I like in this. And there's so many that change so much that I really cannot imagine what the meta is going to look like. I can't hazard a guess. So if you want to know my final takeaway for the patch, the advice I'd give you is the same as every major patch, man. Reset your brain, relearn the game, take advantage of the strongest things offered to you. There's too many changes for me to have a comfortable picture of the meta in my mind right now. On the whole, though, I really like the patch. And I haven't even covered the 2 things I like the most, which are Mak and Monetization. Those 2 things are both great. Mak looks really interesting. The monetization changes all look great. I didn't cover them here, but they really, really do look fantastic. I'm hoping it's good. I'm optimistic for the future of the game, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then please do the whole YouTube algorithm dance, like, comment, subscribe. All that nonsense really does help the channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.